They say nothing good happens after midnight. I should have listened. It was a Wednesday night, or technically, a Thursday morning. I'd taken the graveyard shift at Benny's Diner, a 24-hour joint on the edge of town. It's one of those places you only see in old movies. Checkered floors, chrome bar stools, and a neon sign outside flickering like it's had too much to drink. I liked it there. It was quiet. Usually, that night the diner was dead, just the way I liked it. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sizzle of bacon grease from the kitchen. I was leaning against the counter, flipping through an old magazine someone had left behind when the bell above the door chimed. I glanced up, and that's when I saw him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that seemed almost carved. Too sharp, too deliberate. His clothes were soaked from the rain, clinging to him like a second skin. But what struck me most were his eyes. They were wrong. I can't explain it, but looking into them felt like staring down a well, dark, deep, and endless. "Coffee?" he said, his voice low and gravelly, like it hadn't been used in years. I nodded, grabbed a mug, and poured. "Rough night." He didn't answer, just stared at the steaming liquid like it held all the answers he'd been searching for. His hands were massive, and as he wrapped them around the mug, I noticed something. His fingernails. They were black, not like he'd painted them, but like the color was part of him, as natural as his skin. The clock above the counter ticked loudly, each second feeling like an eternity. Something about this guy made the air in the room heavier, like the walls were closing in. I cleared my throat, trying to shake off the unease. "Where you headed?" Again, no answer. He just kept staring at the coffee, his lips barely moving, whispering something I couldn't make out. I leaned in, and that's when I heard it. "They're coming." My heart skipped. "Excuse me? They're coming?" he repeated, louder this time, his eyes snapping up to meet mine. I froze. There was something primal in his gaze, something that screamed of danger. They always follow the smell. The air in the diner seemed to grow colder. I forced a nervous laugh, trying to break the tension. "Smell? What smell?" "We just cleaned the grill." The man didn't blink. "Not food." He inhaled deeply, his chest rising and falling like a predator tasting the air. "Blood. Fear. They're drawn to it, like sharks." I took a step back, gripping the edge of the counter. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Listen, buddy. I think you've got the wrong place." He leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "You don't understand. They don't stop. They don't reason. And they don't leave witnesses." My throat felt dry, but I tried to stay calm. People said weird things at 3 a.m. Drunks, sleep-deprived truckers, the occasional tweaker passing through. This guy was just another nut job, right? Before I could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. A woman stepped inside, shaking off the rain. Her red hoodie was soaked, her dark hair plastered to her face. She looked young, maybe early 20s, with wide, frantic eyes that darted around the diner before settling on the man at the counter. "Is it here?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "Did it follow me?" The man's jaw tightened. He stood and turned toward her, his sheer size dwarfing her in the doorway. "You let it here?" "I didn't mean to," she cried, her voice cracking. I had nowhere else to go." My stomach churned. "Hey, what the hell's going on here? If you two have some beef, take it somewhere else. I don't need this in my diner." The man turned to me, his expression grim. "It's not about us. It's about you now." A loud bang cut through the air, making me jump. At first, I thought it was thunder, but it was too sharp, too close. It came from the back door, where the kitchen led out to the alley. "Is there another way out?" the woman whispered, clutching the man's arm. "There's no time," he growled. Another bang, louder this time, followed by a low, guttural growl. It wasn't human. "What is that?" I stammered, backing toward the counter. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a knife. No, not a knife, a blade. It looked ancient. The metal blackened and pitted like it had been forged in a fire 1,000 years ago. "They found us." The next sound made my blood run cold. It was a screech, high-pitched and unnatural, like metal being torn apart by bare hands. It came from the back door, and then from the front, and then from the roof. "They're here," the man said. The screeching grew louder, the sound piercing and relentless. My body froze as if something primal inside me knew that moving might attract whatever was out there. The man shoved the woman behind him, his blade gleaming in the flickering neon light. "Stay close to me. Don't look at it directly, and don't run. Running makes them worse." "Worse," I managed to choke out. He didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the front door, his body coiled like a spring. The rain outside grew heavier, pelting against the windows. Through the blurry glass, I saw something move. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the neon sign, but it was alive. It slid across the glass, a dark, formless mass, stretching and contracting like it was testing the barrier. The woman gasped. "It's the feeder. It's hungry." "Hungry for what?" I demanded. She turned to me, her face pale. "Whatever it can get." Before I could process her words, the shadow slammed against the window. The glass didn't shatter, but it groaned under the force. The thing outside pressed itself flat against the pane, and I swear I saw a face. No, not a face. Eyes. Dozens of them, all blinking at once. "What the hell is that?" I screamed, stumbling back. "Not human," the man said, his voice cold and calm. "They're never human." The back door exploded inward, splinters flying like shrapnel. The smell hit me first, a rancid, sour stench like rotting meat left out in the sun. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through my chest. I turned and saw it. It was massive, its body hunched and writhing like it couldn't decide on a single shape. Limbs jutted out at unnatural angles, claws scraping the floor as it moved. Its skin, or what passed for skin, was mottled and translucent, with dark veins pulsing underneath. The woman screamed. The man lunged forward, slashing at the creature with his blade. The thing screeched, recoiling as black ichor spilled from the wound. "Stay behind the counter," the man barked at me. "Don't let it touch you." I didn't need to be told twice. I dove behind the counter, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. From my hiding spot, I peeked over the edge and saw the man going toe-to-toe with the creature, his movements impossibly fast and precise. The thing lashed out, its claws swiping at him, but he dodged effortlessly, slicing through its limbs like they were paper. Each cut sent more of that dark ichor splattering onto the floor, where it sizzled and smoked like acid. The woman crouched beside me, her hands trembling. "This isn't going to hold it off for long. It always comes back." "What do you mean? What is that thing?" She shook her head. "It's not just one thing. It's many. Hunger, wrapped in flesh. And it doesn't stop until it's fed." "Fed what?" She didn't answer. A sudden crash brought my attention back to the fight. The creature had slammed the man into a table, splintering the wood beneath him. His blade clattered to the floor, just out of reach. "Get up!" the woman screamed. The creature loomed over him, its jaws unhinging to reveal rows of teeth, too many to count. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was adrenaline or sheer terror, but I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, the coffee pot. With a shout, I hurled it at the creature's head. The pot shattered on impact, scalding coffee splashing across its face. The creature shrieked, its body convulsing as steam rose from its skin. The man seized the opportunity. Grabbing his blade, he drove it straight into the thing's chest. It let out one final, deafening scream before collapsing to the floor, its body dissolving into a pool of black sludge. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the rain and my own ragged breathing. Is it dead?" I whispered. The man wiped his blade on his coat and stood. "For now." The woman looked at him, tears in her eyes. "But it'll come back, won't it? They always do." He nodded grimly. "And next time it won't be alone." The quiet didn't last long. The black sludge on the floor began to bubble and hiss, releasing an acrid stench that made my eyes water. The man grabbed the woman's arm, hauling her to her feet. "We have to go," he said, his voice sharp. I stayed rooted behind the counter. Go where? What the hell is this? What are you? He turned to me, his expression unreadable. If you want to live, you'll come with us. Now. I glanced at the sludge. It was spreading, creeping toward the cracks in the floor like it had a mind of its own. I didn't need any more convincing. I scrambled out from behind the counter and followed them to the front door. The rain outside was relentless, sheets of water pouring down and turning the empty parking lot into a shallow lake. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting erratic flashes of red and blue across the asphalt. "Where's your car?" the man barked. "It's parked out back," I stammered. He cursed under his breath. "No time. We take mine." He led us to an old black Chevy parked near the edge of the lot. It looked like it had been through hell. Dented doors, a cracked windshield, and tires so bald they were practically slicks. "Get in," he ordered, sliding into the driver's seat. I hesitated. "What if there's more of those things out here?" "There are," he said flatly. "But they'll be worse if we stay." That was enough for me. I climbed into the back seat, the woman following close behind. The inside of the car smelled faintly of gun oil and leather, and the back seat was cluttered with maps, empty ammo boxes, and a few ominous-looking jars filled with what I could only describe as bits of something. The engine roared to life, and we tore out of the lot, tires splashing through the standing water. "Where are we going?" I asked, gripping the seat as we sped down the rain-slicked road. "Somewhere safe," the man replied. "For now." "Safe?" the woman scoffed. "There's no such thing. Not anymore." He shot her a warning look in the rearview mirror, but she didn't back down. "You know I'm right. They're getting stronger, smarter. You can't keep running forever." "I'm not running," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I'm buying time." "For what?" I pressed. Before he could answer, the headlights caught something in the middle of the road. A figure, standing perfectly still despite the rain pelting down on them. "Jesus, what is that?" I gasped. The man slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just feet from the figure. It was a woman, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her soaked dress clinging to her emaciated frame. She didn't move. "Is she?" "No." The man cut me off. "She's not." The figure took a step forward, her movements jerky and wrong, like a puppet on tangled strings. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, and a sound emerged, a garbled, static-like screech that made my ears throb. "Hold on," the man growled. He floored the gas, and the car lunged forward. At the last second, the figure leapt, slamming into the hood with a sickening thud. The windshield cracked further as her clawed hands scraped against the glass. "She's on the car," the woman screamed. The man swerved violently, trying to throw her off, but she clung on, her face pressed against the glass. Her eyes, if you could call them that, were pure black, oozing a viscous liquid that smeared as she dragged her head across the window. I grabbed at the clutter in the back seat, searching for anything I could use. My hand closed around one of the jars, and without thinking, I hurled it at her. The glass shattered against her face, and whatever was inside made her shriek, a high-pitched wail that echoed even over the roar of the engine. She let go, tumbling off the car and disappearing into the darkness. "What the hell was in that jar?" I demanded, my hands shaking. The man didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the road ahead, but his grip on the wheel tightened. The woman beside me let out a shaky breath. "It's not over." She was right. In the distance, through the haze of rain and headlights, I saw them. Dozens of shapes, slithering and crawling onto the road, their silhouettes shifting and merging like living shadows. "They're blocking the way," I whispered. The man slammed the brakes again, the car skidding to a stop. He turned to us, his face set in grim determination. "We go on foot." Rain lashed at my face as we stumbled out of the car, the headlights illuminating the writhing shapes ahead. The figures blocked the road entirely, a shifting, undulating mass that seemed to grow darker with every passing second. "Stay close," the man ordered, gripping his blade tightly. He glanced at the woman. "You know what to do." She nodded, pulling a small pouch from her jacket. From inside, she scattered what looked like ash onto the wet ground, the rain quickly turning it into a streak of black sludge. "What the hell is that supposed to do?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. "It'll slow them down," she said, her tone firm but uneasy. "If we're lucky." "Lucky?" My voice cracked. "We're screwed." The man turned to me, his gaze like ice. "Not if you do exactly what I say." Before I could argue, a low growl rippled through the air, followed by another, and then another. The shapes began to move, crawling, slithering, and stalking toward us. Their forms shifted in the rain, some sprouting limbs, others stretching unnaturally tall, their bodies breaking the laws of nature itself. "Run!" the man barked, grabbing my arm and yanking me toward the ditch beside the road. We plunged into the wet underbrush, the ground sucking at our shoes as we sprinted through the dark. My lungs burned, and my heart pounded so loud it drowned out the rain. I risked a glance over my shoulder. They were following. The massive shapes poured into the woods like a living flood, their forms flickering and twisting as they moved. I couldn't make out details, just black eyes that glimmered like oil and too many teeth gnashing in unnatural mouths. "Keep moving," the man shouted, shoving me forward as a low-hanging branch whipped across my face. The woman ran beside me, clutching another pouch. She threw it behind her, scattering more ash. One of the creatures lunged forward, its claws raking through the air, but the ash erupted in a flash of light, forcing it to recoil with a shriek. "What are these things?" I shouted, my voice barely audible over the storm. "They're feeders," the man said, his tone grim. "They take what they need. Flesh, memories, souls, whatever they can rip from you." My stomach turned. "How do we stop them?" "You don't," he said. "You survive." The trees began to thin, and through the rain, I saw a faint light in the distance. A cabin. "Up ahead!" the woman yelled, hope creeping into her voice. The man didn't slow down. "Move! We won't make it if we stop." We burst into the clearing, the cabin's porch light flickering like it, too, was barely holding on. The man reached the door first, kicking it open with one powerful motion. "Inside!" he shouted, ushering us in before slamming the door shut. The cabin was small and sparse, with a single room containing a table, a bed, and a fireplace. The walls were lined with shelves cluttered with jars and books that looked as old as the forest itself. The woman grabbed a box of matches from the table and lit a small lamp, the flickering flame casting shadows that seemed to dance with the chaos outside. "They're coming," she said, her voice trembling. The man grabbed a bundle of strange symbols carved into wood from a shelf and began placing them around the room. "Help me secure the perimeter." "What does that even mean?" I asked, my voice rising. "It means we keep them out," he snapped, "unless you want to meet them face to face." I didn't argue. The woman handed me a handful of symbols and showed me where to place them, on the windows, the doorframe, even the floorboards. The growling outside grew louder, accompanied by scraping sounds as the creatures clawed at the walls. The cabin shook, the force of their attacks rattling the windows. "They're testing us," the man said, his voice tight. "Testing for what?" "For a weakness." The symbols began to glow faintly, their carved lines pulsing with a pale, blue light. The growling turned to screeches, angry and desperate, as if the creatures could feel the barrier holding them back. For a moment, I dared to hope we might actually be safe. Then the lamp went out. Darkness swallowed the room, and the temperature dropped so suddenly my breath misted in the air. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the sound of something tapping on the window. "Don't move," the man whispered. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, until it turned into pounding. I felt the woman's hand grip my arm, her fingers trembling. "If they get in," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "They won't," the man said, though he didn't sound sure. The pounding stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a voice came, low and guttural, echoing through the cabin. "Let us in." The voice echoed in the silence, deep and guttural, yet strangely familiar. It sounded like it came from everywhere at once, wrapping around us like a shroud. "Let us in," it said again, louder this time. "No one move," the man hissed, his blade held tightly in one hand, his other clutching a cymbal. "They're testing us." The pounding resumed, harder and faster, shaking the cabin with every impact. The walls groaned, and dust fell from the ceiling as if the entire structure was about to collapse. "What do they want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the cacophony. "They want us," the woman said, her voice trembling, "and they'll tear this place apart to get us." The man moved to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. "They can't cross the threshold as long as the symbols hold. But if they find a weak spot..." A sudden crash cut him off. One of the windows shattered, and a dark, slithering form burst through, landing on the floor with a wet, sickening splat. It wasn't fully formed. More like a shadow made flesh, its body writhing and shifting as if it couldn't decide what shape to take. Black eyes glinted in its amorphous face, and its gaping mouth revealed rows of jagged teeth. Before I could react, the man lunged, slashing at the creature with his blade. The metal glowed on impact, and the thing let out an unholy screech as it recoiled, ichor spraying across the floor. "Seal the window," he shouted, kicking the writhing mass back toward the opening. The woman grabbed one of the symbols and slapped it onto the broken window frame. The symbol flared to life, and the creature shrieked again, retreating out into the night. But it wasn't alone. More shapes began pressing against the broken window, their forms writhing and clawing at the barrier. The symbols pulsed weakly, barely holding them at bay. "This isn't going to last," the woman said, panic in her voice. The man didn't respond. He was already moving, grabbing jars and books from the shelves, scattering their contents onto the floor in a haphazard ritual. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice rising in fear. "Buying us time," he said, lighting a bundle of dried herbs and muttering under his breath. Smoke filled the cabin, thick and acrid, and the creatures outside shrieked in unison. I backed into a corner, my heart pounding as the walls shook under the relentless assault. The symbols were flickering now, their light dimming with each passing second. "What happens if they get in?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. The woman looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "They'll take you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left." The pounding grew louder, and a deep crack split the door down the middle. The man turned to us, his face grim. "When I say run, you run," he said. "Run where?" I demanded. "There's nowhere to go." "There's always somewhere," he snapped. "You just have to find it." The door burst open, and the creatures flooded in. The man charged forward, his blades slashing through the writhing mass, but there were too many. They poured in through the windows, the walls, the floor itself, their forms twisting and merging into a single, overwhelming tide. "Now!" he shouted, throwing something to the ground. A blinding flash of light filled the room, and the creatures recoiled, their screeches filling the air. "Run!" he roared. I didn't think. I just ran, following the woman as she bolted through the back door and into the woods. The rain pelted down, the ground turning to mud beneath my feet. I could hear the creatures behind us, their growls and screeches closing in. The woman grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a narrow path that twisted through the trees. "This way." We ran until my legs burned and my lungs screamed for air. Finally, we stumbled into another clearing, the rain letting up just enough for me to see what lay ahead. A church. Its steeple rose against the dark sky, and faint light glowed from the stained glass windows. "In there," the woman said, dragging me toward the doors. We burst inside, slamming the heavy wooden doors behind us. The man appeared a moment later, his clothes soaked and his blade dripping with black ichor. "They'll follow us," he said, his voice grim. The woman turned to him, desperation in her eyes. "Then what do we do?" He looked around the dimly lit sanctuary, his gaze settling on the altar at the front of the room. "We make our stand." The sound came from the corner of the room, where shadows gathered like a living thing. My stomach turned as I realized the dark was moving, slithering toward us. "Stay back," the man commanded, holding his blade out. The shadows shifted, pulling away to reveal something small, human-shaped. A child. It looked no older than 6, its hair matted and clothes torn. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, wide eyes glimmering in the faint glow of the symbols. "Help me," it whimpered, its voice trembling. "Please, I'm scared," the woman gasped, taking a step forward. "It's a kid. We can't just leave it." "No," the man shouted, grabbing her arm. "It's not real. It's them." The child began to cry, its sobs heartbreaking and raw. "Please don't let them take me. Don't let them hurt me." I felt my resolve waver, my instincts battling the terror clawing at my mind. "How do you know it's not real?" "Because they always take the shape of what you'll let in," he said. "Your weakness, your guilt." The symbols on the walls flickered violently, and the child's cries shifted, morphing into laughter, low, guttural, and mocking. Its body twisted, elongating into something grotesque, its eyes turning black as pitch. The woman screamed, backing away as the creature lunged. The man met it mid-air, his blade slicing through its form. Black ichor sprayed across the room, sizzling as it hit the floor. The thing shrieked, writhing before collapsing into a puddle of darkness. The pounding on the walls grew louder, more frantic. Cracks formed in the wood, and the symbols dimmed to nearly nothing. "They're breaking through," the woman cried. The man grabbed a jar from the shelf, uncorking it to release a pungent, acrid smell. He poured its contents, a thick, black liquid, into a circle on the floor. "Get in the circle," he ordered. "What is that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Your last chance." The woman and I scrambled into the circle as the walls buckled. The man joined us, gripping his blade tightly. "Stay inside, no matter what happens." The symbols failed. The walls exploded inward, the creatures pouring in like a flood. Their forms were chaotic, shifting and twisting as they clawed at the air. The sound was deafening: screeches, growls, and the crackling of wood splintering under their weight. They hit the barrier of the circle, recoiling with furious shrieks. The man held his blade high, muttering words I didn't understand. The creatures writhed, their bodies pressing against the invisible barrier, but they couldn't get through. "Not yet. Can it hold?" I shouted. The man didn't answer. His focus was absolute, his lips moving faster as the creature's attacks grew more frenzied. One of them, a massive, hulking shape, reared back and slammed its entire body against the barrier. The ground shook, and I felt the energy around us falter. "It's breaking," the woman screamed. The man's chanting reached a crescendo. The circle flared, blindingly bright, and the creatures let out a collective scream. Their forms dissolved, melting into the air like smoke, until nothing remained but silence. I collapsed to the floor, my body trembling. The man lowered his blade, his face pale and exhausted. "Is it over?" the woman whispered. "For now," he said, his voice hollow. "But they'll be back." "What were they?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The man looked at me, his eyes haunted. A reminder that some doors should never be opened. The rain outside had stopped, but as I stepped out of the cabin, the air felt heavier, like the forest itself was watching. I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't want the answers, and I never stayed at Benny's diner after midnight again.